Domaraju Gukesh is a 16-year-old chess prodigy from India, and yesterday, on the 6th of December, he was playing against the reigning world champion, 32-year-old Magnus Carlsen of Norway. Now, this is the Speed Chess Championship organised by Chess.com. They play a number of games at 5 minutes plus 1 second increment per move. Then they go to 3+1, then 1+1. So the time control gets steadily faster, the blunders increase. Now, this is game 4. Magnus had got off to a 2-1 lead in the match. Gukesh looking to even the score. Really exciting game, this one. Let's see what happened here. So e4 from Gukesh, c5 from Magnus, one of his favourite defences, the Sicilian, knight f3, knight c6, and now we see bishop b5, the Rossolimo variation, and Magnus goes for this e6 line. g6 is also common there. Now when you go to e6, you're preparing to bring this knight to e7, defend this one. I've covered a couple games recently where that happens, white castles allows it, but here we see the pawns shattered straight away. Pawn recaptures, always capture towards the centre with your pawns unless you have good reason not to, as a general rule of thumb. And now here we see pawn to d3. Not the normal d4 move, the open Sicilian move. You don't want to trade these pawns because white now has ideas to target this doubled pawn. It's now a bit weak. So we see knight e7 now from Magnus, and here Gukesh brings his knight to d2. More common there is queen e2 or castles, but you can kind of go your own way, especially in blitz, and the moves are a bit interchangeable here. So d5 from Magnus, he takes that central space. And now a really nice idea from Gukesh. He doesn't play the standard castles, he plays pawn to h4. And the idea is he wants to run this pawn to h5, take control of g6, stop the knight from hopping there. Because this knight is really struggling for jumps, as we can see. Can't come to any of these squares. So as long as you maintain the pawn on e4, this one's going to struggle. We'll see Magnus remaneuver it soon. So f6 now from Magnus, preparing to go e5. Now h5 played, carrying on that plan. Pawn to e5, queen e2, and now this bishop develops to e6 and also makes room for the knight. We're going to see Magnus use that square to maneuver that horse. So pawn to c4. Now this is a very standard positional idea. When you're targeting the front one of these doubled pawns, or indeed the one behind to be honest, but when you're targeting doubled pawns, you often want to fix those pawns on the squares. We see similar ideas in the Nimzo Indian with colours reversed at times, and then you can target that pawn. You don't let it move forward, free itself. So a5 from Magnus. Now a4 comes. He doesn't want, he being Gukesh, he doesn't want to allow this pawn down the board and interrupts the development of this bishop to a3, which we'll soon see. So rook b8, pawn to b3, and now Magnus goes knight c8 here, preparing to bring that one to a more favourable square. Bishop a3 targets this pawn, and here Magnus makes a positional mistake. So he should immediately close the centre with pawn to d4, just not allowing Gukesh to play c takes and then bring the rook to c1 and target this pawn. But what we had instead was Magnus going bishop d6, and it did allow this move of c takes on d5, although Gukesh didn't play it. And as said, the idea is that you bring the rook, you target the pawn. Well, how do you defend? Queen e7 looks logical, but then you can take here, bishop recaptures, and go queen to e3. And we took first, of course, so as not to allow d4. And this is now attacked 3 times. You can't actually defend it. c4 starts to complicate things, but it's a good position for white. So that was the way to go. Now I'm running back to the moves position here. It's really annoying on chess.com, by the way. I don't know if anyone can help me with this. I want this view where I've got the clock times on screen here, as you can see on the left. But then if I switch to analysis mode, the board goes grey. And to get back to the move mode where it's kind of not grey like this, I have to click on moves and then back to analysis. It's weird. It's annoying you can't do it all at the same time. Anyway, bishop d6 from Magnus. Now rook c1, same ideas, but Magnus can close with pawn to d4. And here we see a lot of shuffling. Very common idea when the position's closed, you shuffle your pieces, look to improve them. So rook c2 from Gukesh. So he's making way for this bishop to bounce back into the game. Now we had knight b6, the bishop came to c1, and now king d7 from Magnus. Fascinating idea, castling by hand. Because the pawn structure is so locked up on the queen side, that's where he's actually deciding to run his king. So the knight came to f1, clears way for the bishop, looks to come to g3. And now knight a8 from Magnus. Look at that for a move. I mean, look at the journey this knight's been on already. It's right back in the corner, but it's coming to c7, where it can then go to a6 or b4, or it can come into e6 here. Really nice play. Rook b2 played, so it protects this pawn, which was just attacked when the knight moved. Knight to c7, knight g3, and now Magnus decides to turn his attention to the king side. Not forced, but it's what he does. He could carry on with knight a6, good move. But g6 was played, and now a nice response from Gukesh. He goes knight to h4. So targeting this pawn here, and you definitely don't want to push on with g5, or then you give up this monster square on f5. So coming back here, we instead had bishop to f7. By the way, rook g8 the best way to defend, because after bishop f7, you're running into a tactic. Can you pause here and find the move to win a pawn? So the move to play is pawn take, oh, sorry, not queen g4 check, that's what Gukesh played, is pawn takes on g6, here we go. Pawn recaptures, and then knight takes is the trick. So after these ones swap off with check, knight recaptures, well, when the bishop takes back, this is the trick. You check, king goes, or pawn f5 is the best way to play actually, and then you lose your bishop. This is a sample line. So that was a shot which Gukesh had but missed. But running it back here, he just did it in slightly the wrong order. So he played the check first, but now the knight was able to come to e6, block that check, and if you go for the same thing here to try and win a pawn, the problem now is the queen comes along, it pins that knight, and you're picking this queen up here if the knight tries to move, so you're just losing a piece. No good. So after knight to e6, now we had knight to e2. Steps back, prepares f4, Magnus goes king c7, stepping off the pin, very natural. Pawn f4 played, and now Magnus could just take that pawn with a decent game, but he goes pawn f5, really mixing things up. Both players under a minute now. So the pawn took on f5. And now this was Magnus's idea. He recaptures on h5 here, picks up a tempo on the queen. It has to drop, so there's no time to take the knight. Now it came back here, and now the knight took on f4. But actually, this whole series of exchanges is favouring white, because although you've opened this e-file towards the king, which is what Magnus is playing for, this bishop's looking pretty miserable, staring at its own pawn, kind of stymied by this one as well, and these pawns. So this knight's actually a superior minor piece in the long term if Gukesh can maneuver in the right way. So rook e8 check, king f2, and this is where Magnus just plays a fantastic exchange sack. So he could play something simpler, like rook g8 is a decent idea, the computer points out, somehow some kind of invasion looking for, but he goes rook e3, mixing it up, 28 seconds for Gukesh, 20 for Magnus, and you really have to take this rook because so many things are attacked, plus the bishop here. So takes is forced, this one takes with check, queen recaptures, and now queen f6 is the follow-up. Some really nice ideas on the dark squares. So as I've drawn here, there's this bishop e5 to d4 maneuver going on, plus you're hitting this undefended rook, and this one's eyeing the pawn here. So rook e2 was played, it gives this pawn, but it was the best move to stop this bishop d4 idea. That's what you did when you lined up the battery. And now the other arrow I'm drawing here, well, the bishop is threatening to now take that pawn on c4 because the rook is pinning this pawn to the queen. So that's why queen e4, and now queen g5 from Magnus. So threatens this deadly check on g3, rook h3 covered, queen g4, and this is such a Magnus move. How many of us in this position here are going to go for a queen exchange? You're in exchange down, the king's a bit exposed, you're trying to attack. You know, not many people are swapping queens, but Magnus is going for it. And white is better here, by the way. Knight f3, good move, not taking, allowing the pawn to come with tempo. And now Magnus voluntarily takes here, and the advantage for Gukesh is about 5.5. He's seriously ahead, he's an exchanger, pass pawn here. But he goes wrong here. He takes with the pawn. His best was takes with the rook, because even though you ditch this pawn here, now you can spring into life with this knight. Knight e5 is a good move. Knight g5 also good. You open up this attack here, plus you hit the bishop and so on. So good advantage for Gukesh. He starts trading pieces off the board. But after queen takes on e4, coming back to the move, so Gukesh instead took with the pawn. He allows bishop takes. He's still better, but now he missteps again. So rook e1 was best, just not running into this tempo after bishop f4. In the game here, we see rook to d2, bishop f4 played, and now again after rook c2, you're running into more tempos with these deadly bishops. Such a powerful duo. And now the nail in the coffin, we see the rook capturing on c5. But the defense here is kind of next to impossible with this amount of time on the clock. Even in classical, it's tough. So the best move is knight d2, hitting this rook. Now, if the bishop takes, well, you can take here and white's ahead. If you take this one, I didn't actually analyze this, but yeah, just rook takes on d2 and you're hitting here and the rook's here, plus the pawn's running, let's not forget. So this was the way to go and white's ahead. But in the game, we had the rook taking on c5, and this is actually now after check, king here, mate in 3, but Magnus misses it here. So he goes rook e2 check, but if he checks on b1, king f2, well then he mates like this. This is actually checkmate because of how the bishop box in. Now I know that was mate in 2, it was mate in 3 because you can give a rook here, but okay, same difference. So coming back here, we had rook e2 check, king d1 was played, now the rook slides back to a2, and Magnus is almost there. So he's threatening to actually mate the king here. These bishops are taking the squares. So king e1 was played to give a square, and now you can go for the same pattern I just mentioned, or bishop e3. Hits the rook and sets up this now blockade of all the squares from the king. Rook a1 is coming. How do you stop it? There's no rook c1. It's just curtains. Gukesh chucks knight d2, a second on the clock, but now we get check. And this was the final move because you just have to give up pieces to stave off mate. You'd have to block with the knight, let's say, then rook, and this is checkmate. So a nice victory from Magnus, mixing it up. And in the end, he won about 20-something, 7. Very, very convincing. He was almost on an adoption streak at one point, which is 10 games in a row. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you want to see another fascinating, epic chess game, then check out the video on screen, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks for watching.